HOA, Karen let her friend's kids invade the pool like it was community property. The towels weren't mine. The footprints weren't mine. So now the gate's locked. The rates are posted. An HOA Karen, staring through the fence with $400 in hand. They wanted access without permission. Now they pay for every splash. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The moment I saw wet footprints on my backyard deck, I knew something wasn't right. There's something sacred about silence, especially when you've spent years without it. I just moved out of the city after a decade of non-stop noise, honking horns, sirens, and that constant buzz of too many people packed into too little space. My new home was my antidote. A quiet cul-de-sac in a suburban development where lawns were trimmed in straight lines, mailboxes matched, and the air actually smelled like grass instead of exhaust. I was done with chaos. I wanted calm. And my backyard pool, that was my sanctuary. It wasn't massive, just a modest in-ground pool with a wraparound deck and a few loungers under a slatted pergola. I'd refinished the wood myself, added soft solar-powered lights around the border. Clean, peaceful, mine. It was the one place I could float under open skies and feel like I had finally exhaled. So when I stepped outside one Thursday evening after work and saw wet footprints dotting the deck, my stomach tightened. They were small, too small to be mine. Bare footprints leading from the deep end to the stairs near the side gate. I stood there blinking at them as they evaporated in the sun. My pool cover was half off. A towel I didn't recognize was draped over a chair, and on the ground, just out of reach of the shadows, lay an empty juice box and two half-melted ice pops.
No one else was supposed to be here.
I don't have kids. I don't have roommates. And I certainly hadn't invited anyone over. I live alone, by choice and with full appreciation. I didn't even know my neighbors by name yet, aside from the occasional wave from across the street. I preferred it that way. Low expectations, low conflict. Still, I figured maybe it was a one-time thing. Some kids wandered in by accident. A prank. I checked the gate. Locked. The fence. Still standing. I shook my head, cleaned up the mess, and told myself to let it go. But the next day, it happened again. This time it was wet towels, 3 of them, bunched up near the pool's edge. One of my inflatable pool noodles was bitten straight through. And some child I assumed, had left a single flip-flop sitting like a taunt on the diving board. My heart beat faster. Not because I was scared, but because I was angry. My space had been violated. This wasn't some random mistake. Someone was treating my private pool like their own public water park. I checked the side gate again. Still locked, but the latch was slightly loose, like someone had jimmied it open. The fence on the far side? There was a patch of flattened grass that hadn't been there before. Maybe where someone had climbed over. Now I was on alert. I adjusted my work schedule slightly the following week. Came home early twice, hoping to catch whoever it was. But each time, my backyard was quiet. Still. No sounds but birds chirping and the occasional dog barking 2 houses down. For a moment I even wondered if I was imagining it, until Tuesday. Tuesday confirmed it. I'd left a small camera running, just an old GoPro mounted discreetly behind a flower pot, pointed at the pool. When I checked the footage that night, my blood ran cold. 3 kids, maybe around 8 to 12 years old, scaled the side fence like it was a jungle gym. They dashed straight to the water, throwing off their clothes mid-run and cannonballing into the deep end. They laughed, splashed, wrestled on the deck. They even helped themselves to drinks from a small cooler I'd left by the grill. I didn't recognize them. They weren't just random neighborhood kids. They knew what they were doing. This wasn't their first time. I paused the video at the moment they left, because that's when I saw it. The smallest one, a girl with a bright pink swimsuit, unlatched the side gate from inside. She held it open, motioned for the others to slip through, and shut it behind them with the ease of familiarity. She didn't break in. She let them out, which meant someone had let them in. And as I stood in the dark watching that screen replay on loop, one thought repeated louder than the rest. This wasn't some innocent mistake. Someone gave them permission. And I was going to find out who. The real twist came when I found out who'd been giving them permission. I wasn't just angry. I was stunned. The idea that someone had given permission for strangers to swim in my pool was absurd. It was my property behind my locked gate. But the footage didn't lie. Those kids knew their way around like they'd been there a dozen times. And that little girl with the pink swimsuit, she didn't find a hidden key or crack the lock. She had access. So I did what any rational person would do. I went to the HOA. Our homeowners association operated out of a small office inside the community clubhouse, a place I'd never had rain to visit until now. I walked in with a file folder of printed screenshots from my security footage and a copy of my deed, clearly showing my property lines. There were two women behind the desk. One of them looked up and gave a tight, polite smile. The other didn't bother. That second woman, perfectly curled blonde bob, tennis skirt, oversized sunglasses propped on her head like a crown, was Karen. Literally, her name tag said Karen H. President. When I explained the situation, her reaction was surreal. "Oh, that," she said, with a breezy wave, as if I'd just brought up a neighbor's lawn ornaments. "Yes, a few of the kids like to cool off. It's been so hot lately, don't you think?" I blinked. "They're swimming in my pool." She smiled like I was slow. "Well, the community doesn't technically have a pool, and yours is so visible from the walking trail. Many of us assumed it was, shared use." "No," I said flatly. "It's not. It's enclosed. On my private property." Karen sighed, pulling her sunglasses off and inspecting them like they were more important than I was. "Look, I understand this is new to you, being part of a tight-knit neighborhood, but we tend to share amenities here. It's part of what makes the community special." I stared at her. "Are you saying you told kids they could use my pool?" "Oh, I may have mentioned to a few families that you wouldn't mind," she said casually. "You weren't using it during the day anyway." I was floored. "Do you realize how dangerous that is?" I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "If one of them got hurt, slipped, drowned, you'd be liable." "I'd be liable." But Karen was already shaking her head. "You're overreacting. Honestly, you sounded it hostile. This is a family neighborhood. We don't need that kind of energy." My jaw clenched. "You gave verbal permission for minors to trespass on private property. That's not just entitled, that's reckless." And that's when her tone changed. Still sweet, still polished, but sharp enough to cut glass. "Well," she said, standing up and smoothing her skirt, "maybe if you didn't keep your gate locked like some kind of fortress, people wouldn't feel so excluded. You did choose to live in a community, not a bunker." She walked over to a filing cabinet, pulled out a thick binder, and dropped it on the counter. "This is the HOA Charter. Page 42. Residents are strongly encouraged to maintain an open and welcoming demeanor towards shared use spaces and community interaction." Now, granted, your pool isn't listed as communal, but the spirit of the rule is about fostering inclusion. I stared at her, incredulous. "That's not a legal clause. That's a glorified suggestion." Karen offered a slow, sugary smile. "Well, unfortunately, we do have the authority to issue fines for non-compliance with community standards." And then she pulled out a piece of paper and handed it to me. It was a citation for me, for creating a hostile environment and discouraging community engagement. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding. Karen wasn't clueless. She was calculated. She'd taken my silence, my privacy, my absence during the day, and weaponized it. To her, my pool wasn't just water. It was leverage. A social perk she could extend to her circle to maintain her crown as queen bee of the cul-de-sac. I left the office with a copy of the charter in one hand and a spark of fury in my chest. They wanted to treat my home like public property? Fine. I'd show them just how much paperwork it took to make something truly official. By the next HOA meeting, I was the villain because I wanted privacy in my own home. It's amazing how fast a neighborhood can turn on you. A week after my run-in with Karen, I walked into the monthly HOA meeting, expecting backup, sanity, a shred of logic. I had documents, security footage, a printed list of property codes. But from the moment I opened the door to the clubhouse, I felt the shift in the air. People didn't greet me, they stared, whispered, looked away like I was tracking mud across white carpet. Karen was already seated at the front, flanked by two board members who looked like they'd been sipping her Kool-Aid for years. Her posture was perfect, smile rehearsed. A clipboard rested on her lap like a gavel. As I took my seat, I heard the woman next to me mutter, "That's the guy who screamed at the kids." I turned. "Excuse me?" She blinked, feigning innocence. "Oh, never mind. Just something I heard." Heard from who? I didn't have to ask. Karen hadn't just deflected responsibility. She'd spun the narrative into a brand new fable. When the meeting started, it didn't take long for her to weaponize it. "There's been some concern," she began, addressing the small crowd of neighbors about the use of certain spaces in our community. "Some residents are feeling excluded." She didn't name me. She didn't have to. The rest of the evening was a blur of thinly veiled comments, people bringing up overreactions and keeping things neighborly. One woman said her daughter came home crying because someone yelled at her just for being near the fence. Another man said I was disrupting the spirit of the neighborhood. No one asked me what really happened. No one cared about facts. By the end, Karen had slipped in a motion to review the language around community amenity access and homeowner responsibility. It passed with murmurs of agreement. I walked out feeling like a pariah. And it didn't stop at the meeting. Over the next 2 weeks, I found 3 unsigned notes in my mailbox. "You clearly don't belong here. Maybe try a community with barbed wire instead. This isn't the city, loosen up." I discovered a handful of crushed soda cans dumped in my front garden. My recycling bin was knocked over 3 times in 5 days. One morning, I found someone had tossed a beach ball into my pool. Not tossed, placed carefully, like a calling card. I was being isolated, slowly, deliberately. So I fought back the only way I could think to. I took control of my own property. I changed the gate latch to a coded keypad, posted a sign, "Private property, pool use by permission only." I installed 2 new cameras, motion sensitive, angled at the side fence and back entrance. I even added a solar floodlight. It didn't take long. 3 days later, I received a notice from the HOA, citing me for unauthorized exterior modifications not approved by board review. The letter was signed, of course, by Karen herself. The hypocrisy burned. Kids were trespassing and swimming in my pool with her blessing, but I was being fined for putting up a lock. The next HOA meeting came around, and I didn't wait for permission. I stood up before the agenda was even announced. "I have a right to privacy," I said firmly, projecting my voice so everyone could hear. "This isn't about community. It's about boundaries. Someone gave kids access to my yard. That's illegal. I've done nothing wrong except protect my home." Karen raised an eyebrow, clearly relishing the drama. "Well," she said, voice dripping with mock sympathy, "perhaps this neighborhood isn't the right fit for everyone. We pride ourselves on being open, inclusive, and engaged. If you can't handle community life, maybe you bought in the wrong neighborhood." Laughter rippled across the room. A few people nodded. One man actually clapped. I didn't say another word. I picked up my papers, my photos, and my copy of the HOA charter, and walked out. But that moment was the breaking point. They thought they'd humiliated me, that I'd retreat. But they forgot something important. I wasn't just angry anymore. Now, I was motivated. A formal application to the HOA board, a recorded usage agreement, proof of liability insurance, city inspection certification for public safety compliance. Without these, access was unauthorized. Any incidents, injury, property damage, even theft, would open up both the HOA and the homeowner to legal exposure. I read that section 5 times, just to be sure I wasn't imagining it. Then I smiled. Karen had played herself. By telling people my pool was open to the community without ever following protocol. She hadn't just bent the rules, she'd broken them, and if anything had happened during those unauthorized swim sessions, God forbid she'd be the first name on the lawsuit. I kept digging. There were other gems too. The bylaws hadn't been formally updated in over 6 years, which meant some of the clauses contradicted newer state housing ordinances. There was also language around exclusive use privileges for homeowners adjacent to green spaces. Ironically, like me. If I played this right, I could argue that my pool being visible but not legally accessible should be explicitly exempt from any future communal designation. Still, knowing the rules wasn't enough. I needed a strategy. The next day, I reached out to a real estate attorney. Not just any lawyer, a friend of a colleague who specialized in HOA disputes. She was sharp, efficient, and genuinely amused when I laid out the situation. "You mean to tell me," she said, laughing, "they tried to make your backyard pool into a neighborhood rec center without any paperwork?" Exactly. We started quietly building a case. She coached me on what to document. Photos, emails, HOA eating minutes, even Karen's petty citations. I installed new cloud-based surveillance with backup storage and began saving every interaction, every voicemail, every note. And I didn't tell a soul what I was doing. Let them believe I was sulking. Let them think they'd won. Because while they were gossiping at the clubhouse, I was drafting formal letters. I was reading insurance clauses. I was preparing city permit forms, not to shut down my pool, but to monetize it. If they wanted to use it like a public space, fine. I'd treat it like one, and I wouldn't break a single rule. That's when the idea hit me. Simple, legal, and devastatingly poetic. If they thought my pool was a community resource, I'd let it be one. At $400 an hour. With full insurance, a permit from the city, and a signed waiver for every guest. I closed the binder, leaned back, and smiled for the first time in weeks. Let the HOA try to argue with that. When they came for their usual afternoon swim, they were greeted by a padlock and a permit sign. It was a Saturday afternoon when the first squeal echoed down the block. Kids in flip-flops and floaties charging toward my backyard like it was opening day at a water park. But this time, the gate didn't swing open. Instead, they found a shiny new padlock, a metal keypad installed on the side post, and a laminated sign zip-tied to the fence. Notice, this is a permitted use pool. Access is restricted. Current hourly rate, waiver and insurance required. Contact management for scheduling. There were a few seconds of confused silence. Then came the protests. Shouts of, "What is this? And is he serious?" echoed down the sidewalk. One of the parents, Janet, I think her name was, stormed right up to the gate and rattled it like she could shake the lock loose. That was the moment Karen arrived. Hair pinned back, sunglasses on, clipboard in hand. She marched down the sidewalk like she was preparing for war. "This is illegal," voice sharp with fury. "You can't just start charging people for access in a residential zone. This is a violation of our community charter." I stayed calm. Maybe too calm for her liking. I walked out onto the deck with a copy of the HOA charter in one hand and my permit paperwork in the other. The padlock gleamed behind me like a badge of honor. "Actually," I said, flipping to the marked page, "I can. Article 14. Communal amenities must be permitted and insured." Which this now is. Karen blinked. "I've filed with the city," I continued. "Have a provisional permit. Insurance rider attached. Liability waiver forms ready. Want to see the form?" I held it out. She didn't take it. "You're exploiting the community," she said, stepping forward. "This isn't about safety. This is petty revenge." I tilted my head. "Petty? No. Legal? Absolutely." She opened her mouth, but I cut her off. "By the way, I've logged every instance of unsupervised child access on this property. All while the HOA had no communal use policy, no insurance, and no city inspection. So if even one of those kids had gotten hurt." I let the pause hang in the air. "You wouldn't just be morally responsible, Karen. You'd be personally liable." That got her. Behind her, I noticed some of the parents quietly pulling their kids away. One dad whispered something, and they left without another word. Another woman, who had previously laughed at my HOA meeting humiliation, suddenly found her phone incredibly interesting. I wasn't just winning the legal argument. I was changing the risk calculus. Because now, this wasn't about a neighbor with a grudge. This was about liability. Lawsuits. Insurance nightmares. And no one wanted to be the reason Karen's petty empire came crashing down. By sunset, the sidewalk was empty. The gate, untouched. I was halfway through a cold drink on my back patio when I heard a knock at the front door. I didn't even need to check the peephole. Karen stood there, no sunglasses, no clipboard, no smile. "We need to talk," she said quietly. I took a long sip, then opened the door just enough to lean against the frame. "Do we?" Her jaw tightened. For the first time since I moved into the neighborhood, the queen of the cul-de-sac didn't look so composed. And I knew right then this wasn't just about pool access anymore. This was about control. And she'd finally realized she was losing it. But I wasn't surprised. I was prepared. 2 weeks earlier, when I started building my case, I'd applied for a low-impact residential event hosting permit through the city's Department of Community Development. Not a full-blown commercial business, just a classification that covered private events like backyard rentals, swim lessons, and social functions. The application included proof of insurance, usage limits, even quiet hour compliance. It was airtight. I submitted the permit copy, the email confirmation, and a letter from my lawyer to the HOA board within hours of receiving Karen's complaint. And then I sat back and waited for the cracks to form. Because while Karen had power, what she didn't have anymore was plausible deniability. The board had tolerated her antics for years. Her passive-aggressive notes, her unannounced compliance checks, her whispered gossip campaigns. But this time, she'd crossed into dangerous territory, legal territory. At the next HOA board meeting, you could feel the shift. Gone were the warm greetings and inside jokes. The room was tense, sterile. Karen arrived late, hair a little frizzier than usual, makeup more rushed. She didn't look at me. I sat near the back, documents neatly stacked on my lap. The board president, technically a separate role from Karen, though she always ran things, cleared her throat and began reading my lawyer's letter out loud. Line by line. You could see the discomfort spread across the table. A few members shot Karen quick glances. One scribbled something nervously. Then came the tipping point. Just as Karen opened her mouth to respond, another resident, Marla from 2 houses down, raised her hand. "I think you all should see this," she said, standing. "It's an email Karen sent to the neighborhood group chat last month." She passed out printed copies. I read over someone's shoulder. Karen had written, in black and white, "He's never around during the day. The kids can use the pool as long as they're careful. Just close the gate behind you." Silence. The same board that had once laughed at my concerns now stared at Karen like she'd dropped a live grenade on the table. One member, Greg, a usually quiet accountant, finally spoke. "Karen, did you really give people permission to use his pool after he'd complained?" She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I was trying to be neighborly," she stammered. "It wasn't formal." "But you encouraged it," Greg said, frowning, "knowing there were liability risks. That's serious." Karen's hands shook slightly as she reached for her water. Another board member called for an emergency closed session. Karen tried to object, but her voice cracked. For the first time, she looked cornered. "I think we need a recess," she said, almost whispering. No one disagreed. As the board filed out, Karen remained seated, eyes unfocused, lips pressed into a thin line. Her gambit hadn't just failed, it had backfired. And now the queen was wobbling on her throne. The HOA thought they were the authority until the state stepped in. Karen built her little empire on the assumption no one would ever push back. For years, she ruled the HOA like it was her personal court enforcing rules, when convenient, bending them when it suited her, and handing out favors to the same 5 families that praised her at every meeting. It wasn't overt corruption, it was quieter than that. Slippery, dismissible, until someone forced it into the light. That someone, this time, was me. After the incident with the leaked email and the emergency HOA session, I filed a formal complaint with the city's housing authority. Not out of spite, out of necessity. I included copies of the HOA's own rulebook, proof of my permit, the fines issued against me without merit, and statements from other residents. 3 weeks later, the auditors arrived. City compliance officers in polo shirts and khakis showed up at the clubhouse with clipboards and legal pads. They weren't loud, they weren't dramatic, but their presence sent ripples through the neighborhood like a dropped stone in still water. And Karen? She unraveled. Suddenly, the woman who always seemed so composed couldn't finish a sentence without stumbling. Her emails became erratic, filled with half apologies and vague explanations. Board members stopped replying to her. One even quit. Her control was slipping fast, and she knew it. The investigation expanded beyond my complaint. Once the city got involved, they pulled financial records going back 5 years. What they found was a nest of sloppy bookkeeping and favoritism. Karen had waived late fees for her friends, approved unvetted reimbursements, spent discretionary funds on community decor that suspiciously matched the flower arrangements in her own yard. And worst of all, she failed to report small income collected from community event vendors, bounce house rentals, food trucks, even a holiday bake sale. The sums weren't massive, but they added up. More importantly, they exposed a pattern. Karen had treated the HOA like a private slush fund, and now that harmless neighborhood queen image she'd curated for years was collapsing under the weight of an actual paper trail. I didn't gloat. I didn't say I told you so. I kept to myself, mowed my lawn, cleaned my pool, and nodded politely when neighbors started approaching me differently. "Hey, just wanted to say thanks," one woman said as I was trimming hedges. "None of us wanted to deal with her. You stood your ground." "I thought you were being dramatic," another neighbor admitted over the fence. "But you were right." It was surreal, watching the tide shift. A month earlier, I was the grump with the gate. Now I was some kind of local legend. The final blow came at the following HOA meeting. Karen walked in, pale. Her usual blowout dulled into a limp ponytail. Her clipboard was gone. The board president stood, cleared his throat, and read from a prepared statement. "Effective immediately, Karen H. is suspended from all HOA duties pending the outcome of a city-led compliance review. A vote will be held next month to appoint interim leadership." There was no applause. Just quiet, stunned silence. Karen didn't protest. She sat there as her crown slipped off, eyes low, hands clasped tightly in her lap. The woman who once told me I didn't belong in her community now couldn't even speak in it. As the meeting adjourned, I stood and slipped out the side exit, unnoticed. I wasn't there for glory. I'd gotten what I came for: accountability. And for the first time in months, I walked home through the neighborhood. Not as an outsider, not as a villain, but as someone who finally felt like he belonged. The pool was finally mine again, but it had become something more. In the quiet that followed Karen's fall, something unexpected happened. My world didn't just go back to normal. It changed. For weeks, the neighborhood felt different. Softer. The judgmental stares vanished. Sidewalk conversations returned. Kids played without looking over their shoulders. And me? I started sleeping again. The conflict had drained me more than I'd realized. The paranoia, the stress, the sense that I had to keep defending something that was already mine. I'd bought this house to escape the city, to find calm, to live quietly, but I hadn't expected the fight for peace to be louder than the chaos I left behind. There were moments, late at night, when I questioned if it had been worth it. I'd become suspicious of every noise, wary of every neighbor. I stopped trusting smiles. I second-guessed my instincts. And for a while the pool, my one place of solace, felt tainted by the weight of the battle I'd fought around it. But as the dust settled, something else came into focus. I had stood my ground, not through anger, not through threats, but by outsmarting the very system meant to control me. I had learned its rules, used its language, and made it bend toward justice. I didn't yell. I didn't break anything. I didn't retreat. I learned. And through that, I grew. So when the new HOA board, now led by a younger, more balanced team, approached me about hosting summer events at my pool, I didn't slam the door. I invited them in. Together, we drafted a simple agreement. Limited hours, small groups, supervised only. Anyone who used the space would sign a waiver, pay a nominal fee to cover insurance, and respect the posted rules. It wasn't a business. It was balance. A few families booked birthday swims. A couple of retired neighbors organized water aerobics on Tuesday mornings. A local mom started offering kids swim lessons. It was quiet, clean, safe, controlled. And I kept the key padlock. It wasn't about walls anymore. It was about boundaries. The pool had become more than a backyard perk. It was a symbol of how a person could draw a line without becoming a villain, of how respect had to be earned, not assumed, of how community, real community, didn't mean sacrificing privacy. It meant honoring it. Sometimes I'd catch kids walking by, slowing just to look through the slats of the fence. No one climbed it. No one rattled the gate. The laminated sign still hung there, clear and firm. Permitted use only. Respect the space, respect the homeowner. Simple. The sun dipped low one evening, casting golden light across the water. I hadn't booked out the pool that day. No kids, no neighbors. Just me in the hush of dusk. I slipped into the water slowly, letting it wrap around me like a long-forgotten comfort. The ripples stretched out wide, fading into stillness. For the first time in months, it felt like it belonged to me again. Not just physically, but emotionally. Not just because of a deed or offense, but because I had earned the right to reclaim it. Floating on my back, I stared up at the darkening sky. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't tense. I wasn't waiting for the next fight. I was just there. Whole. Home. And as I drifted beneath the stars, I thought, not with bitterness, but with quiet resolve. This water's mine, but I know who I am now, and that's worth more than peace. I hadn't seen her since the fallout, until she showed up at the gate. It had been nearly 3 months since the last HOA meeting with Karen's name on the agenda. The new board moved forward quietly. The audits wrapped. Life in the neighborhood had settled into something resembling peace. And Karen? She vanished, at least publicly. No more clipboard rounds. No more passive-aggressive memos. No more muttered comments at community gatherings. I assumed she'd gone back to being just another resident, quietly licking her wounds behind drawn curtains. So when I saw her standing at my gate one overcast afternoon, 2 kids beside her, hair wet with anticipation, I froze. She didn't look like the Karen I remembered. No sunglasses, no tennis skirt, no air of command. Just a tired woman holding a pool bag in one hand and the hand of her youngest in the other. I stepped out from under the pergola, uncertain. She offered a small, hesitant wave. Hey! I walked to the gate slowly, unsure what was about to happen. We stood on opposite sides of the fence, the keypad lock between us. Karen cleared her throat. I know I'm the last person who should ask you for anything, she began, voice softer than I'd ever heard it. But it's been a hard summer for them. I just wondered if they could swim. Just for today. Under supervision. We'll pay. I didn't answer right away. Not because I was angry, but because for once I had the right to decide. The moment sat heavy between us, not tense, not bitter, just real. Eventually, I nodded. Yeah? You'll need to sign them in. She blinked, almost surprised, then nodded quickly. Of course. I opened the gate and handed her the clipboard. Standard liability waiver. Usage log fee disclosure. She read it without protest, signed and slid 2 20s into the collection box. Her kids ran to the water, shrieking with joy. I handed her a towel. She accepted it wordlessly. Karen didn't linger. She sat quietly at the edge of the deck, watching her kids with a quiet reverence. I hadn't expected. There was no smugness. No superiority. Just a mother grateful for a moment of normal. As the sun dipped lower, she called them in. Helped dry them off. Thanked me again, quietly, sincerely. Then they were gone. No grand apologies. No second chances asked for. Just the smallest flicker of dignity exchanged in a moment of mutual understanding. I sat alone by the pool afterward, the ripples fading to stillness. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like balance. Not every story needs a villain punished or a hero celebrated. Sometimes, justice is quieter than we imagine. Sometimes it doesn't look like revenge. Sometimes, it looks like an invoice and a locked gate. Ever had a neighbor who crossed way past the line? Drop your wildest HOA or neighborhood story in the comments. We read everything. Because around here, privacy isn't petty. It's power. Stick around. You never know what rule gets broken next, or who gets locked out.